cell phones for the event, please. Thank you.
A very good morning to all of you. On behalf of Dr. Rajat Kathuria, unfortunately Rajat is in Singapore today. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this release of the very important report jointly done by World Bank and ILO on exports to job, boosting the gains from trade in South Asia. This is a well-researched report, and I know the authors, and I compliment them for the work. I will not talk about the report. I leave it to them to present it. In India, I think there is no disagreement that export would lead to job creation. We have so much export promotion schemes, initiatives, and we also agree that it would lead to quality of jobs. It will lead to a shift from informal to formal sector employment, from low to high skilled. I think in an era of global value chains and developments, where we really struggle is to actually understand the role of imports in job. How do we actually open up our market to test market products and, establish manufacturing facility, create job, and be part of the value chain. And that is something where the South Asia is really struggling. The report does look into very innovative ways of skilling. And I think that that's where we have Mr. Amitabh Kant and Mr. Manish Kumar, both of whom, as the CEO of Niti Aayog and the Managing Director and Chief Executive of National Skill Development Corporation, has been talking about innovative job creation, job promotion, Make in India. So we have all the stalwarts of India here today for you, both Gladys and Daniel, to actually publicize your report and talk about policy making. We are also at a time when, we are talking about protectionism. And this is a very, very good report when we are talking about exports leading to job creation. Having said that, I would now request Mr. Kant to give his special address. We have rescheduled the program a little bit because Mr. Kant has a pressing engagement, and we would... You want a presentation first? Okay, so can we have the presentation of the... Can we have the release then first and then the presentation?
Do you want the video? Can we have like 2 minutes?
You want the video?
Yes, please.
Come here. Here we have a book.
No, yeah, together with our So thank you very much to ICRIER, to Arpita, to all the participants for being here. So it's a pleasure that we carry out this study together with ILO. So let me tell you a little bit how is the structure of the presentation, and just for sake of time, I will try to compress some of the slides. So first, I will talk about the context, which is the issue of high growth, labor market challenges and trade slowdown. Then I will move into the methodology, our results, and the policies to boost and spread the gains from exports. So South Asia has been growing, and economic growth remains strong. There is no doubt about that. But then the challenge is how to translate that growth into rewards in the labor market. And that's where this report is trying to contribute to this discussion. In terms of the labor market challenge, there is a pressure to create jobs because of the growth of the labor force. So South Asia population has increased by almost 60%. Also, because of that, the economy needs to generate the jobs that are needed and are demanded. The second and important challenge is the informality and low quality of jobs. And again, here, just in terms of the definition, we use is based on employment status. But a feature is that most of the jobs that have been created are also in the informal sector. Then another important challenge are inequalities in the labor market in terms of wage disparities, difference in female labor force participation that also need to be addressed. Then the report moves into discussing the challenges in the area of trade. As Arpita mentioned, then one characteristic is the low intra-regional trade, but also the connection to global value chains. And here we discuss where South Asia stands with respect to other regions. And you can see in this graph that both in terms of intra-regional and also in terms of connection with other regions, South Asia doesn't fare very well. Also, another trend is that the ratio of trade to GDP fell in the case of India. And although I don't have here in the report, it shows the exports and imports, discusses the trends, and exports are also been declining. Another feature of trade is that it also remains highly concentrated on some goods and sectors. And the portfolio in South Asia is less diversified compared to other regions. And in the case of India, it's mainly concentrated on capital-intensive goods. And these developments are important because it's clear from the literature and the experience from other countries that trade contributes to growth and could improve labor market outcomes. So the report is about to try to understand what is the story in South Asia, what is the relationship between trade growth and jobs, because these three elements usually go hand in hand. And just briefly, I am from Mexico. I worked many years ago in the North American Free Trade Agreement. And definitely that trade agreement made a substantial difference in the country in terms of export diversification. Now Mexico, compared to other countries in Latin America, is the most diversified. And this has helped us also to reduce vulnerabilities to external shocks. For instance, on the recent commodity shock, we were the only country that was not hard hit as the others. And also it has generated know-how and moved up to the value chain. We started with apparel, then we moved to light manufacturing, cars now. And also, this has translated into the skills that are required for the labor force. So there is the trade growth and labor market dynamics that we see in other countries. So the approach in this report is what we wanted to understand in a rigorous manner how trade affects labor markets. So this is the main contribution of the report, mainly in the technical aspect, to assess the effect or the impact of exports on local labor markets. And this is novel because there is just very recent literature in terms of how to do this. And our approach builds on a new wave of research that rigorously assesses the effect of exports on local labor markets. One of the precursors of this type of work was the work of Topolova from India. But then there has been other recent papers for US and other developed countries. So unlike these studies, we focus on an export shock, which is the demand from OECD countries for South Asian exports. And this is important because the countries in the region, South Asia, are going through a structural transformation. So it's important to understand how the change in the trend and composition of exports have an effect on local labor markets. So our empirical strategy is at two stages. In the first, we assess the significance of OECD import demand on South Asia exports. We test the instrument, which is OECD imports from the rest of the world. That helps us in order to instrument our variable, which is trade exposure. And this variable allows us to understand what is the effect of trade exposure or the exports of South Asia into wages, employment, and informality at the local level. We do this at the district level. Well, the technical aspects of the report and how it was computed and the interpretation are there in the report. But I think the important thing to understand this approach is that we are looking at the distributional effects of these export shocks. Who gains from this, and also we analyze what type of policies can be implemented in order to ensure that more people benefited from this shock. So I go now to the results. So the first innovative or interesting finding is that we find that higher exports or the increase in exports, which is our variable of interest, leads to higher wages. And more importantly, that these largest wage rewards go to the most educated and experienced workers. Males benefit more than females, but then there is also significant variation across the state and districts. In the report, we have the trade exposure index at the district level and the variation, and the results also disaggregated. And it is important to understand that why it's likely that exports will benefit, at least in the short run, to the most educated or experienced workers, because maybe they are already there, they have the skills, and they could benefit from that type of trade shock. The second important finding is that also we find a significant effect of the increase in exports on reduction of informality, or moving from informal to the formal sector. And what is particularly interesting in the case of India is that this increase in exports per worker lead to greater formalization rates, particularly for females compared to males. So far I have established, just to recap, is at the beginning we saw or we discussed the trends on growth, the labor market, and trade. And then I also mentioned that the connection between these three elements, growth, trade, and labor markets, are close or are related. So the contribution of the report is to credibly assess the impact of trade, in this case of exports, on local labor markets. And then I show the results that the increase in exports do have a statistically significant effect on the increase of wages, particularly for certain groups, but also that there are an effect in the reduction of informality, particularly for some groups. So now what is that we do in the last part of the report? So we said, okay, so what are the type of policies that can be implemented in order to boost and explain the gains from exports? So 3 things that we discussed in the report, but of course there could be more, is first, to increase the scale of exports. Currently, the level of exports per person in the case of India is very low, and when we look at, for instance, Brazil and China, we are talking about $1,000 or $1,500 per person. And also, so this meaning that increasing the scale of exports will be, to increase the size of the pie, will also help that more people could participate in exports, and of course will have an effect both on wages and informality. Then we do 2 exercises or simulations in terms of trying to understand the differential impact of different type of trade shocks. So our export shock, we said, okay, what will happen if the trade shock is only for agriculture? What will happen if it's only for labor-intensive industries? What will happen if it's only for capital-intensive? And what will happen if it's also for services? So we do these simulations to try to understand the differential effect or impact of different type of trade shocks on wages and employment. So the results are there, but in the case of India, what we found is given a labor-intensive shock, the largest increase or in wages will be for the low-skilled workers, and also largest reduction in informality will be for young and also for women. So this is kind of a tool, I mean, for policymakers in case they want to assess different type of shocks and how it affects the labor market. That could be also useful. Then the other simulation we do is, given that there is a trade shock or an export shock, what will happen if we change the composition of the workforce? What will happen to wages and employment? So we do the exercise of simulating, okay, what will happen if we increase the share of women into the labor force? And we do it for several, we do it for the 75, or we do it for different thresholds. And also we do the same with skills. What will happen if we increase the skills in the labor force? What will be the effect of a trade shock on wages and employment? So, for instance, increasing the share of women into the labor force could reduce informality given a trade shock. So these are just some of the exercises to stimulate the thinking. There are other things that can be done with this approach that we have developed depending on the interest of policymakers. So thank you for your time. I hope it was not too compressed. Thank you.
It gives me great pleasure to now invite Mr. Amitav Kant to give his special address. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Let me first congratulate the authors of this report, Erhan Artuk, Gladys Lopez-Acevedo, Raymond Robertson, and Daniel Samaan for this wonderful report on exports to job. I've been a long-term believer that if the South Asian region has to grow for long periods of time over the next 3 to 4 decades, which is critical for them to be able to lift a very, very young population above the poverty line, it's not possible to do it without exports. No country in the world has been able to grow without exports post-World War II. Whether you look at Japan, Korea, China in recent times, so exports are critical. There's been a lot of debate on jobs, whether India itself is creating adequate number of jobs in recent times. My view is that while we are creating jobs, but there's a lack of, the quality of jobs is missing. There's a challenge on quality and there's a challenge on wages. And therefore, the problem with the South Asian region is that it's the least integrated region in the world. There is no intra-regional trade. If you go to different regions of the world, countries in different regions of the world have grown and progressed and expanded because travel, tourism, trade are all regional in character. You know, unless and until the region doesn't grow, it's very difficult to penetrate global markets. And therefore, the South Asian region has to grow. And South Asian region has not grown and expanded because of geopolitics. And therefore, my view is that increasingly, unless and until that integration, because integration doesn't take place, it will be very difficult for trade to grow in the South Asian region. And therefore, increasingly, India is looking at the Southeast Asian region rather than the South Asian region. And I think it's important to realize this. But in the South Asian region itself, if we look at it, it's not possible to grow without being an integral part of the global value chains, because exports, 2/3 of the global trade takes place in global value chains. And therefore, unless you don't integrate yourself with global value chains, it will not happen. And to integrate yourself with global value chains, to my mind, you need to be highly competitive. And to be highly competitive is not possible till you don't scale up. And therefore, if you want to push exports, and I'm not in favor of many policy objectives to be targeted at the same time, that we want to create jobs, we want to provide jobs for women, all the policy objective should be one single objective. And that single objective is that you need to push for exports. And if exports happen, a logical consequence of that will be that India will, or the South Asian region will create jobs, and a logical consequence of that will be that you will provide increasing jobs to women, and their labor participation will go up on account of that. And therefore, the question to be answered is, what do we need to do to push up exports? And this will not be possible if we don't remove the barriers to greater level of exports and greater level of firms scaling up. And my view is that larger firms not only witness lower per unit cost, but they also benefit from global competition that drives them to continuously increase productivity level. And I don't think we need to look far. We need to look at just India's the automobile sector, which has been successful in large part due to the ability of domestic firms to scale up. I think promoting clusters, manufacturing clusters, ensuring backward-forward linkages, facilitates firms to become larger. And I think unless the South Asian region doesn't push for manufacturing clusters, especially around coastal areas, so that their exports can be dispatched faster given their proximity to ports, it'll be very difficult. And cluster-based manufacturing will allow firms to save on costs, while the location close to coastal areas will save transportation costs and time. That's number one. Number two, if you look at India, 70% of India's manufacturing workforce has been employed in firms with less than 20 workers each. And therefore, they contribute less than 12% of manufacturing output. And to my mind, removing barriers faced by micro, small, and medium enterprises with respect to accessing capital, hiring workers, acquiring land, all these help these firms to expand and increase productivity. And this is critical, and this is something which the government of India has really focused on in recent times. Thirdly, I want to point out that, and I'm just giving you the example of India because this is the major dominant player in the South Asian region. If India performs, then everyone else performs. That if you look at our ranking in the World Bank, while we've improved radically, I mean, we've given a massive push to ease of doing business, and we've jumped up about 65 position in ease of doing business. But on trading across borders, we still remain 146 out of 190. And unless and until, the component of doing business, which measures the time and cost, including tariff associated with border compliances, domestic transport procedure for trading goods, and, exporters in the South Asian region, let me tell you, take 4 times the time taken by Chinese exporters to comply with border compliance requirements. And therefore, unless you don't improve on border compliances and trading across borders, it's not possible to grow your exports. This is important. And therefore, we need to reduce border and port turnaround times and lower the cost of trading through a number of measures. And I think first and foremost, to my mind, we need to focus on digitization across ports in the entire South Asian region. We need to bring in last mile online access and moving processes completely online. We need to really push for non-electronic data interchange across ports, across airports in the South Asian region, and this is important. I also want to touch upon one major thing which is important for exports, and that is that we must ensure policy consistency to reduce informational barrier. Without predictability and consistency over a long period of time, it will not happen. We have a lot of tariff policy changes in the South Asian region. Month by month, quarter by quarter, year by year, there are policy changes. Just to give you one example, the Central Board of Excise and Customs in India issued 173 tariff-related notifications between April 1, 2015 and June 2018. I mean, if you have such large number of additional notification, this increases the complexity of trade rules. And if you increase that lack of predictability and consistency, you will not be able to do this. So I think there has to be a huge push towards all these areas. There's to be a huge push towards standardization. I don't know. I got the report last night, so I just glanced through it, but benchmarking yourself against global standards is critical if you want to participate in global value chain. This is critical. So my view is that it's not possible for South Asian region to grow over long periods of time at rates of 9 to 10%, which should be the ambition of the South Asian region. Without growing at 9 to 10% over 3-decade period, it's not possible to lift poverty from this region and lift a very young population. You have the youngest population, and without that, it's not possible. Without exports, it's not possible to grow. And without exports, you can't create jobs. You can't create formal jobs. Good quality jobs cannot be created without exports. And exports cannot happen without a vast range of measures. But this is a huge opportunity for the South Asian region. While the rest of the world is looking inwards, I think the South Asian region needs to take a contrarian view and focus on exports by targeting large global markets. And this, to my mind, requires size and scale. It requires ease of doing business. It requires the right business environment and adjusting to global standards. And these measures alone can help the South Asian regions integrate with global value chain and achieve a very robust and sustained economic growth over a long period of time. And with these few words, let me again congratulate the authors. Let me congratulate World Bank, ICRIER, ILO, all of them for this phenomenal study, Exports to Job. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to say something. Martin Rama is retiring, is moving out of India today. He'll continue to do many things. But I wanted to compliment him. He's been an outstanding economist who's done some very unique work and has been a real asset to India while he's been here from the World Bank. So we are really going to miss you, Martin. You'll be greatly missed for all the great work that you've done, and we wish you all the best and a great future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kant. May I now request Mr. Manish Kumar, MD and CEO, National Skill Development Corporation, to give his special address.
Good morning, everybody. Firstly, I would like to congratulate everyone associated with this report. In NSDC, we deal with skills to jobs, and this one is about exports to jobs. So therefore, there is an intersection which is of great interest to us. And we really look forward to reading this report carefully, understanding how it's going to help us reshape some of the things that we do, understand things that we do, and then perhaps reshape the things that we do. I will share a few things about what we do in terms of skills and jobs, and then perhaps from my preliminary understanding of your initial remarks, mention about 1 or 2 points which I found personally very, very exciting and something to reflect on and think about. On the skills front, so far as Government of India is concerned, there would be more than 10 million people being skilled, reskilled, and upskilled every year. And about 5 million of that is done through the training partner network that we have created through the National Skill Development Corporation, which includes mostly short-term training, but now has also been combined with apprenticeship. And this does not include about 600,000 children whom we skill in schools for 4 years in about 7,000 schools across the country. So this is on the capacity side. We work on almost 38 different sectors, from aviation to logistics to beauty and wellness to healthcare, and logistics, as I mentioned, which I consider as one of the most important at this particular point of time. And we have more than 2,000 different qualification packs and national occupation standards numbering more than 5,000 that contributes to skilling. I want to share a bit about the impact that we have found skilling is having in the society. The first one is the fact that when we skill people and then we compare that cohort with anybody who might not have been skilled but still gets a job. So we looked at 3 different types of people. People whom we skilled and who got certified, then people whom we skilled but never got certified because they could not clear the assessment exams of the sectoral skill councils, and the third is people who were not skilled but still ended up with jobs, and compared the wages on them. And this is a sample which is all India wide, done through a third party, but obviously financed by us and has limitations in that sense. And we found that those who got skilled actually get 1,000 rupees per month more compared to those who don't get skilled at all, if he's skilled and certified. And the average wage we found, if you're not skilled and you get a job, is about 8,000. That'll be about 9,000 if you were skilled and certified. And if you are skilled but not certified, it'll be about 8,600. So you are still 400 short, but you still get some premium out of the skill that comes to you. So that gives us some confidence that the private sector seems to be giving some premium to skills that is being imparted, a question that often comes to mind of many people when they look at skills. The second is our understanding that what is the expectation of people, because this low quality job that Amitabh Kant also mentioned, and we also believe in, we found that most of the people, youths, in average, if they get about 9,000 after getting skilled and placed by us, their expectation from life is about 19,000. And they're not very happy about this small, this differential that's there in the life. And any bit of money that might be offered by a competitor, they quickly leave the job. So you'll find attrition extremely, extremely high at that level. And attrition seems to get less the moment you reach closer to 19,000. So that's the big disparity that exists in the market. The third is we were looking at the willingness to pay of people who actually get skilled after they get skilled. So are they willing to pay for if we were to give them another round of skilling, and how much will they pay? Because one of the challenges for us has been that half the people whom we skill, we do through fee-based course, the other half we do through grant-based course. And what we're trying to understand is subsidy and pure subsidy a very good idea, or shall we mix it up with what might be willingness to pay of the people, and we found that they are willing to pay almost 3,500 rupee for one training of about 3 months' time if they were to be given another round of training. So there is a willingness to pay in the market in average when we look at it. But I think what interests us most is the government's program for recognition of prior learning, which I found to be quite unusual in the sense that nearly 47% of people who went through recognition of prior learning came back to state that their wages increased. And the wages increased more the less educated you are, essentially meaning that the benefits is going to the bottom of the pyramid, income pyramid. So that was a very positive one. Second is 63% of them coming back and saying that their respect in workplace has gone up. And I think about 70% of them saying that they have acquired soft skills which they lacked prior to this particular recognition of prior learning. So we found this a very powerful one. We found this particularly powerful because some of our survey show that 42% of India is actually skilled. This is people above 15 years and about below 60. 42% of them are skilled, but then formally skilled, well, maybe about 8%, 9% as you commonly know. And therefore, there is a large percentage which actually is skilled but not certified. And therefore, the need for recognition of prior learning becomes extremely critical for India. And that's something which we have taken up in a big way with the Sector Skill Council. Coming back to the issue of jobs and the fact that what is our observation from numbers that we gather, whether jobs exist or not, we have noticed that jobs actually exist in large numbers. And some of the number crunching we did shows that given all the investments that has occurred over the last 5 years, and we went back up to 10 years actually to look at all the investments, about 1 crore that has been made in every sector. We picked up 26 sectors for which we had data. We found that the jobs are there, potential for jobs is there in terms of the investment that's made. Whether that's being converted into full jobs, in number of jobs or not, depends on the capacity utilization of whoever is invested. So we are not sure about that factor. Our analysis shows that the potential is there for creating 2.5 crore jobs, that's 25 million jobs every year. That's the level to which you can actually create jobs. And this consists of both formal and informal. And then construction, which was mentioned here as one of the growing sector. Well, it was true when we did this particular survey in 2013. It's not true today. Our analytics of last year actually shows that the fastest growing sector is logistics and transportation. That's the one which is growing at the highest rate, followed by retail. And you see all this Swiggy and everything around. So therefore, I think the economy itself is changing very rapidly. The various verticals of the economy is changing quite rapidly. And these insights are useful, I think, for us in terms of exports, because we have observed that some of our training partners who are in this business, for example, industry is one of our training partners based in Bangalore, and they supply to a lot of, they deal with textiles, and most of their people actually are village women who actually operate from the village, starting from yarns, and then go into textiles, and then finally, the final product is actually sold abroad. So there's a whole chain that operates through this particular group led by Neelam Chibar. And then we also have groups like Jaipur Rugs. We have Sai Exports. They're also part of our training partner network. What we have observed is huge benefit that comes to them through their models. And this report actually, we in a way says the same thing. So it quantifies in some sense what we might have been anecdotally observing. And some of the interesting ones is also that perhaps the export is not necessarily physical. Like we have noticed in case of Bhubaneswar, girls in Bhubaneswar actually helping in driving driverless cars in California. And that amazed us. And that's basically a knowledge export in some sense. And that's the online world which is coming up, where essentially they are sitting before on a computer, looking at a picture of a street in California and tagging different things on that picture, that, okay, this is 60 miles per hour, there is a curb on the left-hand side, there might be a dumpster, they mark all of that, they tag it, within 10 minutes they send it off, and maybe about hundreds of children are sitting there, and these pictures are going to the cloud. If someday some car is moving in that particular street, it's basically pulling out those data from the cloud and converting it into machine learning. So there are interesting things which are happening, and I'm sure these knowledge exports are also contributing. I'm not sure whether this part has been captured in the report or not, but the world is moving in a different way, and we realize that we have got a particular division that works in future of jobs together with National University of Singapore in that direction. Now, a few of the things which I strongly feel we could benefit from looking at this report, and I really look forward to reading it closely, is this recognition of prior learning and the impact it can have on the wages of people who are already skilled but not recognized for their skills, but are contributing to exports. And we work in all the districts of India. I think if this report will actually motivate my team to get into what are the districts where this export is actually on the upside trend, and then look at focusing on RPL there, because there are two factors which will move the wages upward. Then the export is pushing it up, and so is the RPL, and therefore there is a kind of doubling of effort, and therefore more benefit that you can draw out with the same level of energy that we put in. And the second one is simply understanding the types of skills that might be necessary in these particular districts. So therefore, it's going to, I think, motivate us to map out which are the districts in India that might be important given the findings of this report. On a deeper analytical side, I think we might also reflect a bit more on the fact that when we look at India, I mean, with 1.3 billion population, that's almost equal to that of Africa, it's almost like a continent, and the variation itself is so huge within the country. So extremely important for us perhaps to decompose these findings and see whether some states will be affected more compared to another, and perhaps then focus on those states more than the other. So we are excited by this report. My team is actually sitting here, and they're listening to the findings of this report, and we are going to work together with you and take your help in getting deeper insight into this work. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. May I now request Dr. Rinku Murgai to give her address.
Thank you so much. I'm actually here on behalf of Junaid Ahmed, our country director, who was hoping to be here but then was unable to. He had another commitment. So let me, I think you've already received the presentation, so I'm not going to recap what the report does. Let me just use the opportunity to thank ICRIER for organizing this, for ILO, for the collaboration with the bank team, and in particular the team itself for the quality of the work they've done. I mean, my own read of this report is that it shows the value of careful research. I think there's so many questions, and that as a research and policy community that we have, there are, at the very high level, there are answers that are kind of obvious. The fact that exports have served countries well in growth, the fact that that exports have tended to go with higher quality jobs. The report kind of confirms that. I'm glad it does. It would have been a huge puzzle if it didn't. The fact that we don't know very much about what's going on with job creation, I think that's very debated in India. It points to a research agenda, but more importantly, a careful sort of statistical strengthening agenda in the country. The fact that India has, broadly put, poor quality jobs. I think those things that motivates some of the report, those are very important. But what I'd like to highlight, and what I found particularly interesting, is the careful methodology that the report applies to look at a question that we don't ask very often when we think about the impacts of exports. Particularly, what are the distributional impacts of the growth of exports, who gains and who loses. So, the fact that they find that exports are rewarding educated workers, I think that's an important insight. It speaks to I think it raises a lot of questions about why is it that our exports are not rewarding relatively on the spectrum lower skilled workers. Is it because of our capital intensive export composition? Is it something else? So I think it raises, as any good report should, it answers some questions and then throws out many others that we want to think about. Another one that I found very interesting is that it rewards men on wages, not women. Why is that? Does that have to do with something about the composition of our exports? Or does it have to do with discrimination in the labor market? Or does it have to do with deeper questions about why women in India choose to work or not work? And there's a large and growing literature on understanding female labor force participation. I think also the fact that we find that the benefits are localized spatially. There is obviously a regional integration agenda, but in my mind, the report also raises questions about domestic integration. India has made a lot of progress through the GST, but less so on mobility. Or again, let me say, we just don't know. We don't have the data to know how much progress we've made on mobility. But the fact that we find localized benefits spatially also raises questions about what India should be doing about domestic integration. So let me stop there because I want to open it up as quickly as possible for a discussion, but I would strongly recommend that everybody reads the report to learn from the methodology and to see what good data analytics can do in terms of answering some questions and throwing up a whole series of other puzzles. Thank you.
May I now request Ms. Dagmar Walters to give her remarks.
Thank you, esteemed participants, everyone in the room. It is indeed my pleasure to be here today at this launch of the report on exports to jobs and boosting the gains from trade in South Asia that researchers indeed from ILO and World Bank have been working together on. And I'm delighted that this collaboration across the two institutions has worked out this successfully and that we are able to discuss the results of this interesting study today. Researchers in both institutions have indeed identified areas of joint interest, which gives us an opportunity to reflect, exchange views, and find common understanding on how to approach and address certain key issues related to exports and whether or not they positively impact on wages and jobs. And I do hope that we have future opportunities to do joint research again. In particular, looking forward to new data and data sets also being released in India and in South Asia. And I'm also very glad to see that we are able to discuss this report here today with experts in India, as for example from ICRIER, who are so kind to host us today, as well as with distinguished speakers from the Indian government, universities, and other institutions present here. Now, obviously, as a director for the technical team for South Asia and country office India, I'm personally invested in research that focuses on South Asian countries. And this study also presents many interesting specific results for India. As many of us know, the labor markets in India and South Asia are riddled with challenges. There are in particular 4 pillars of the ILO Decent Work Agenda. These are employment, social protection, rights at work, and social dialogue that we consider indispensable building blocks for sustainable and inclusive growth and development. Maybe just to mention 3 challenges for India that this report also speaks to. The nexus between growth and prosperity rests on the ability of India to create more and better jobs over the coming years. Especially developing states are having to match really rising aspirations and expectations from young people who enter the labor market. Second, promoting a more equitable and inclusive growth path would also require seeing more women join the labor force. Female labor force participation is, as we know, particularly low in South Asia, and is also in many regions the case that women are paid in average less than men. And then finally, India is going through a process of structural transformation. Workers leaving agriculture and taking up jobs in growing sectors in urban areas around the country. And then, as we also heard, the strength and growth in number of persons enrolled in education and skilling in India is certainly on the increase, especially also among the women and from people from rural areas. And along with this demand for education, workers who join the labor force, especially from rural India, will also have higher expectations from their jobs to counter the opportunity cost of shifting to non-agricultural occupations. But still, as many of the new jobs are informal, it would also be important that this structural transformation leads to more formal jobs than before. I would like to welcome the focus of this research on globalization and trade markets. Even though South Asia has come a long way and opened up to international trade over the last 2 decades, it is true that the region appears to be less linked to global markets than other regions in Asia. So what benefits could more globalization bring to South Asia, if any? Understanding the impacts of globalization is critical in this region. However, it appears to me that this is a question that does not only concern South Asia, but goes much beyond this region. Many people around the world are currently asking what the benefits of globalization are for them, for workers, and for labor markets and social systems. International trade opens up opportunities for efficiency gains and productivity gains, but for whom exactly? Where in the country, and how long does it take for these positive impacts to become visible and pervasive? I think the interlinkages between international trade and the labor markets in developing and emerging countries are still not that well known and understood. The authors of this report have picked up some of these questions for India in a nuanced and, as they also explained themselves, in a novel manner, following the most recent research in this field. So the discussion of its findings will be very relevant to us, I feel, and guide us in designing better policies for India and South Asia in the future. And this is a discussion that will enrich us today. Thank you.
Can we have the video now, please? We do have some time for question answers. So you can please raise your questions and to introduce yourself and to let us know whom you would like to raise your question to.
I was teaching a course in globalization in Delhi University. There, undergraduate course. So I used to teach that there are two views about labor market, and one World Bank view which wants a very flexible labor market. The other one is ILO view, which has more protectionist labor market. It seems now both of you have joined. So is there any change in your positions? That's one question. The other question is, many of the critics are saying that this globalization and trade liberalization, because the developed countries are highly capital intensive, both in their consumption structure and production structure. With integration, we are also going into more capital intensive, both consumption and production. That way it's having adverse impacts on employment.
Do you want to take up one or two questions?
That one, yeah. Thank you for that really very relevant question. I really feel tempted. I was waiting to intervene at the end, but I feel tempted to respond to this one straight away, because I was the director of the World Development Report on Jobs 2013, in which, by the way, we collaborated very closely with the ILO. And when we started working on that report, where we really wanted to take a fresh look at jobs-related issues, labor market issues, we came very quickly to this realization of what you are teaching, is that there is a group of people that thinks that the more you intervene in the labor market, the worse, and there seems to be a group of people that think that the more you put protection and mechanisms in place, the better. And so, and it's true that geographically we were seeing more of those people in the American side of the Atlantic than in the European side of the Atlantic. And so we decided really to take a fresh look, and we involved a lot of people from different angles. Among our advisory panel, Ella Bhatt, in the case of India, was in the advisory panel, but we also had a lot of academics. And we did a very thorough review of the empirical literature, of what could be considered rigorous empirical literature, where there was good identification strategies and all that. And we basically came where one of our friends, Professor Richard Freeman, was coming up, which is this idea of a plateau. And the idea of the plateau is that within some range, difference in labor market interventions have relatively minor effects. Whether your minimum wage is 5% higher or 5% lower tends not to make a big difference. It has compositional effects. So one thing that we found is that greater protection in general favors more male workers and penalizes more young workers compared to other fronts. But it's more a redistribution among workers than big changes. And then there are two big cliffs of that plateau. And the two big cliffs are, one is the absolute lack of protection. And I think when we looked at the case of South Asia, what we thought is the issues of health and safety standards. It was the time of the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh. That was a kind of example of a kind of cliff you don't want to follow from your plateau. The other extreme is the case of regulation that is so stifling that it dissuades firms to grow, to employ, to formalize. And one of the questions which we address is India off the plateau in that respect? And I put the question mark, and we'll be happy to share my views on that. But I think we came at something that I think by now people think is reasonable, which is don't go too far in any of these two directions, as long as you are in the plateau. The main drivers of growth and dynamism are elsewhere, and that's where one should focus. So I don't want to intervene in the broader discussion about this report, but I wanted to clarify that point. Thanks.
Any other questions? Any response from Milo?
Yeah. See, the main problem for, I am Professor Shastri, I teach international business in a business school. The main problem for the boost in exports in South Asia is basically the turnaround. See, your ships are stuck at the ports. For example, I used to work for a company called MMTC. My iron ore vessel, by the time the material comes and it will go to Australia and Brazil, it used to wait a long time, about 20 days, 15 days, a lot of incurring and demurrage. So as a result, our margins will be greatly reduced. Whereas the same case in a place like Singapore, within about 48 hours, the vessel is filled up and go to the destination. Unless these aspects are taken care of, the boost in export cannot take place, and consequently it will be a dent on the employment scenario.